Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let's discuss briefly the topic of culture shock. What is culture shock? The term culture shock refers to feelings of uncertainty, confusion, or anxiety that people experience when they are transplanted into a society that is different from their own. When they go abroad, when they enter into a new society, they usually face culture shocks. Culture shock sets in when people vacation, do business, go to school, or move to another city or country. The syndrome arises from an individual's unfamiliarity with local customs, language, and acceptable behavior. A person from another country might not be able to understand your customs, your language, or your behavior, and thus he may face problems. Some key factors. Culture shock is a sense of anxiety, depression, or confusion that results from being cut off your own familiar culture, environment, and norms when living in a foreign country or society. Those experiencing culture shock go through distinct phases of euphoria, discomfort, adjustment, and acceptance. While time is the best antidote for culture shock, people can take provocative steps to alleviate it as well. So, with the passage of time, you can accept things, the new things, and then there is no culture shock. Understanding culture shock. Culture shock happens when an individual leaves the comfort of their home and go to a completely foreign location, whether that is for a work or for any other reason. The shock can be fairly intense if the two locations are completely different, such as going from a small rural area to a large city. People can also experience culture shock when they move from one place to another within the same country, even. The feeling is particularly intense at the beginning of the stay abroad and can be tough to overcome. It's important to remember that the syndrome usually dissipates over time. As time passes, people they understand the place, the people, the custom, the food, the language, and they accept it. There are four stages of culture shock. People go through a culture shock, tend to go through these four different stages. The first stage is called the honeymoon stage. This first stage is commonly referred to as honeymoon phase. That's because people are thrilled to be in their new environment and they enjoy this new environment. They often see it as an adventure. If someone is in a short stay, this initial excitement may define the entire experience, but the honeymoon phase for longer stays eventually ends, even though people expect it to last. The second stage, frustration stage. As the initial stage is over, people grow increasingly irritated and distorted with the new behavior. Fatigue sets in with the misunderstanding of others' actions or conversations, ways of doing or operating things. Local habits also become increasingly frustrating. All the little nonsenses of speech, appearances, and behaviors that are instinctively understood at home, here in this new area, they are not understood. The inability to effectively communicate, to interpret what others mean, and to make oneself understood is usually the prime source of frustration. This, the most difficult period of the culture shock, is when depression or homesickness, longing for the familiar and comfortable, becomes most prominent. The third stage is the adaptation stage. Once the frustration stage is over, people will start to adjust to their new surroundings. Although they may still not understand certain cultural cues and issues, people will become a little more familiar and at least to the point that interpreting them becomes much easier. The last, acceptance stage. Following this period of adjustment comes the final stage of culture shock, acceptance. This doesn't mean that new cultures or the new values and beliefs and attitudes are completely understood. Rather, it signifies a realization that complete understanding isn't necessary to function and thrive in the new environment. It's not necessary to realize everything, but during this acceptance stage, travelers have gained the familiarity they need to feel more comfortable with life in foreign society. Culture shock isn't caused by a specific event, it results from encountering different ways of doing things, being cut off from behavioral cues, having your own values brought into questions, and feeling you don't know the rules. How to overcome culture shock? Time and habit help deal with culture shock, but individuals can take some shock observing steps to speed recovery. Try to learn about new country culture and understand the reasons for cultural differences. Don't indulge in thoughts of home, constantly compare it to the new place. Don't seal yourself off, try to meet and socialize with people. Be honest in a judicious way about feelings disoriented and confused. Ask for advice and help. Talk about and share your cultural background. Now, this culture shock is very much related to the language shock. And the way we feel culture shock, the same way we can feel language shock. Because it is not only the culture that is new, it is the language, the representation of the behavior that is different in new place and new areas. So, with the passage of time, this culture shock is accepted and it is realized by the human beings in the new places. The same way, language differences can also be realized. Now, culture shock is one of the significant barrier to the way of success in intercultural communities. There are various reasons which can lead to culture shock. A similarity attraction hypothesis suggests that people are more willing to communicate, understand, enjoy, trust, work, or play with others who share similar features, such as language. Therefore, when a person enters in a new cultural and new language context in which people are having different cultural and language characteristics, the similarity attraction character would interfere with his or communication and culture shock would appear. It will be also visible in his language. Another reason which causes culture shock relates to intra-society and inter-society differences. It is believed by some researchers that individuals carry their own ethnic and cultural identity. That is, everyone is identified by the cultural group that he/she belongs to. Culture shock has different stages, and we have discussed these four stages. Now, finally, we should discuss what is language shock and how it is related to culture shock. Language is an important component of culture, also has a great influence on the intercultural competence of international students and any other people who initially move to a place where a different language is spoken. Language is commonly seen as an integral part of culture. Nida argues that factors such as entities, events, states, process, and characteristics of one culture have a strong influence on the content of language spoken in the culture. Not only cultures have impact on the languages, but also the languages relatively has a great impact on the cultures that they are embedded in. And we have discussed this thing in the Sapphire or hypothesis, and especially in the linguistic relativity where we look into the world through language, where language influences thought and culture. Therefore, language and culture are two closely related factors that influence each other in various and complex ways. Culture shocks exist when people are transferred from one culture to another. Linguistic shocks would exist when the language environment is switched to another language environment. As language and culture are closely related, culture can have a great impact on language shock, and this is clearly evident from the linguistic aspects and the aspect of sociolinguistics. On the one hand, language shock from the linguistic perspective, for instance, language shock can occur at different linguistic levels. Linguistically, it can occur in phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. For instance, speakers of languages which do not have affixes may find infix as an unimaginable linguistic phenomenon. For example, I'm a Pashto speaker and I do not have infix in my language. It will be very strange for me when I speak and learn another language where this infix phenomena is there. On the other hand, each culture has its own ways of expressing thoughts, feelings, and sharing speakers' inner world. the different ways in which speakers of different cultures and languages talk about the human world, and this could be a source of language shock. So, there are various things that are related to each other. Language is a part of culture. Culture is transmitted to language, so we can have a culture shock, we can also have a language shock. Thank you so much.